You've noticed something. You haven't said it out loud, maybe not even to yourself, not fully, but you've noticed the way they look at you just a half second longer than necessary, the way they find reasons to extend the conversation when it should have ended 10 minutes ago. The way they remember things you said in passing, things you barely remember saying yourself, and bring them back to you like small, careful offerings. The way they seem to light up, genuinely, involuntarily, when you walk into the room. And something in you doesn't quite know what to do with that. Part of you wants to dismiss it, to chalk it up to coincidence or friendliness or your own imagination reading too much into something ordinary, because the alternative, sitting with the idea that someone younger is genuinely deeply drawn to you, feels complicated in ways you can't immediately name. It feels flattering and unsettling and strangely vulnerable all at once. Like a door you weren't expecting to find, standing open in a wall you thought you knew completely. So you file it away, you move on, you tell yourself it's nothing. But it isn't nothing, and somewhere beneath the rationalizations, you already know that. What I want to talk to you about today is why. Not in a simple, surface-level way, not in the way that flatters without illuminating, but in the deep, honest, psychologically real way that Carl Jung spent his lifetime trying to explain, the way that actually changes something in how you understand yourself and love, and the strange, specific gravity that certain people carry without ever trying to. Because here is what Jung understood that most people never get. Attraction, real attraction, the kind that doesn't make sense on paper and doesn't respond to logic, is never really about the surface of things. It is never about age or appearance or what two people have in common on a checklist. Real attraction is about what one person's soul activates in another. It is about what gets awakened, what gets remembered, what gets called back to life. And when someone younger is madly in love with you, it is because you have activated something in them that they cannot activate in themselves, something they have been searching for in everyone else and not finding, something that, the moment they encountered it in you, felt like the answer to a question they'd been carrying for years without even knowing they were carrying it. There are 3 reasons this happens, and by the time I'm done, I think you'll recognize yourself in all of them. The first reason is the one nobody talks about honestly. Because to talk about it honestly, we have to begin with something that sounds simple but runs very deep. You have survived things, and that survival has left something in you that younger people can feel but cannot name. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the wounded healer. The idea that our deepest wounds, if we are willing to move through them rather than around them, become the source of our greatest capacity to reach other people. Not because suffering is romantic, not because pain makes us more interesting, but because the person who has genuinely been broken and who has, despite that breaking, managed to find their way back to wholeness, carries a quality in their presence that is entirely different from someone who has never been tested. You know what loss feels like. You know what it means to love someone who couldn't love you back the way you needed. You know what it is to rebuild after something you thought was permanent turned out not to be. You know what it's like to be blindsided by life, to have a plan that made complete sense fall apart in a way that left you standing in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, wondering how to continue. And you continued. That is the crucial part. Not perfectly, not without struggle. Not without days when continuing felt like the hardest thing you'd ever been asked to do, but you continued. And in the continuing, something in you was refined. Something in you went quiet in the best possible way. Not empty quiet, but deep quiet. The quiet of a person who no longer needs to perform her emotional life for an audience. The quiet of a person who has learned that not every feeling needs to be immediately expressed, and not every wound needs to be immediately explained. To someone younger, someone who is still in the middle of their becoming, someone whose emotions still arrive fast and leave just as fast, someone who has not yet learned the particular discipline of carrying difficulty without letting it show. This quality in you is extraordinary. They can feel it the moment they're in your presence. Their nervous system responds to yours before their mind understands why. Around you, something in them settles, the internal noise that is always running, the self-doubt, the performance, the constant monitoring of how they're coming across. It quiets down. Not because you've done anything specific, simply because your nervous system has learned a steadiness that theirs is still developing, and nervous systems, it turns out, are deeply contagious. You become, without intending to, the most restful person in their emotional landscape. Jung described this as containment, not the suffocating kind, but the kind that creates safety. The way a deep riverbank contains the water without stopping it from flowing. You don't diminish their intensity. You don't ask them to be simpler or calmer or more manageable. You simply receive them without being destabilized. You listen without immediately needing to fix. You sit with complexity without demanding it resolve itself into something easier. And for someone who has spent their whole life being told, explicitly or implicitly, that their emotions are too much, too intense, too irrational, too demanding, to encounter someone who simply holds space for what they are without flinching, that is not comfort. That is not security. That is home. And people fall in love with home. Deeply, completely. Sometimes overwhelmingly, because when you've been wandering for long enough, the first thing that feels like belonging becomes the most important thing in the world. Now, here is the part that matters for you in this moment. The part that has less to do with them and more to do with the truth about what you're carrying. This steadiness they feel in you, this capacity to hold them without being swept away, is not an accident. It is not a personality trait you were simply born with. It is something you built through experience, through seasons you didn't choose, through the particular education of a life that asked hard things of you and kept asking even after you'd given everything you thought you had. You earned this, every bit of it. And the younger person who can't stop thinking about you, who replays your conversations, who manufactures reasons to be in the same room with you, who feels something shift in their chest when you look at them directly. They are, on some level, honoring that. They are recognizing, even if they couldn't articulate it, that what you carry took something to build. The second reason is more uncomfortable to talk about, and more important precisely because of that. You have become mysterious, not because you're hiding, but because you've stopped performing. There is a particular kind of woman that a younger person, especially a younger person who has grown up in the age of radical self-disclosure, of sharing everything publicly, of performing emotion for an audience at every stage, simply does not know what to do with. A woman who doesn't explain herself constantly, who doesn't fill silence with noise because the silence makes her nervous, who doesn't need to document everything she feels in real time in order to know that it's real, who has opinions she doesn't feel compelled to defend to everyone, who has a private interior life that she has no particular desire to make public. This woman, you, is genuinely confusing to someone who has never encountered her before. Not confusing in an alienating way, confusing in the way that a painting you can't quite decode becomes the one painting you can't stop returning to in your mind. Confusing in the way that a piece of music with unexpected harmonics keeps circling in your memory long after the song has ended. Confusing in the way that makes the mind lean in rather than step back. Jung had a precise way of understanding why this happens. He described what he called the projection of the anima, the way that the human unconscious, when it encounters someone who carries depth it cannot immediately categorize, begins to project onto that person the qualities of its own deepest longing. The younger person is not simply responding to who you are. They are responding to who you are, plus everything they have projected onto you, the wisdom they imagine you possess, the hidden tenderness they sense beneath your composure, the full, complex inner world they can feel through the surface, even when they can't see it. You become, in their inner experience, larger than yourself. Not because you've tried to be impressive, because you haven't. This is the paradox that most people spend their entire lives trying to solve through the wrong method. They believe that being desirable means revealing more, being more available, being more transparent, making it easier for people to know them by flattening the complexity, by making themselves more legible. And what they discover is that the more completely they can be understood in a glance, the less anyone feels compelled to look again. Depth creates return visits. Mystery is not a strategy. It is a natural consequence of having an interior life that is genuinely rich. It is the natural consequence of being a person who thinks carefully, who doesn't rush to conclusions, who holds contradictions without demanding they resolve, who has learned that some truths take time to reveal themselves and that patience in the face of that is not passivity, it is wisdom. The younger person who is in love with you is, in part, in love with the question you represent. What is she thinking right now? What does she know that she's not saying? What is underneath the calm she carries so naturally? What would it mean to be truly known by someone like her? And here is what Jung understood about this dynamic that is so important. The question itself is generative. It is not simply a prelude to an answer. It is an experience. The experience of wondering, of reaching, of feeling like there is more available if you are willing to go deeper. That experience is itself a form of intimacy. The younger person is not just attracted to the potential of knowing you. They are already in the reaching, closer to themselves than they have ever been. Because here is what happens when you are genuinely curious about another person, when you are pulled to know them, when you think about them in the quiet moments and wonder who they really are beneath what you can see. That kind of sustained, genuine curiosity requires you to access your own depth. It requires you to bring your full self to the encounter. It requires a seriousness of attention that is itself a form of growth. You are not just someone they want to know. You are someone in whose direction they are becoming more. And they feel that, even if they couldn't explain it. They feel that being drawn to you is asking something of them, requiring something of them, growing something in them that wasn't there before. And that feeling, the feeling of being pulled towards someone and simultaneously pulled up, is one of the most powerful experiences the human heart can have. Which brings me to the third reason, and this one is the one that goes the deepest. You remind them of who they are capable of becoming, and there is nothing more intoxicating to the human soul than being shown a version of yourself you didn't know existed. Jung devoted much of his life's work to a concept he called individuation, the process by which a person gradually, sometimes painfully, sometimes gloriously, becomes more fully themselves, peels away the layers of performance and conformity and learned self-diminishment, begins to live from the inside out rather than the outside in, stops asking the world what kind of person they should be, and starts answering that question from somewhere much quieter and much more honest. This process is the central work of a human life, according to Jung, and it is not easy. It requires courage. It requires the willingness to face the parts of yourself you've been carefully avoiding. It requires sitting with discomfort and uncertainty, and the particular vertigo of not yet knowing who you are becoming, even though you can feel that you are becoming something. Most people spend decades either avoiding this process entirely or attempting it alone in a kind of bewildered isolation. And then something happens. They encounter someone who is further along, someone who has already done some of the work, someone whose presence says, without words, without instruction, without any kind of deliberate teaching, it is possible. The person you are trying to become, the more honest, more grounded, more alive version of yourself, that person is possible. That person, for them, may be you. They look at you and they feel the answer to something they didn't know they were asking. They feel the specific relief of seeing that emotional maturity is real, that it isn't a myth invented by people who never really felt anything, but an actual destination that actual human beings actually arrive at through the actual living of a real life. They feel in your presence that they are allowed to want depth, allowed to want substance, allowed to want a version of love that is quieter and more honest and more demanding than what they've settled for before. And wanting that, really wanting it, feeling it as a genuine longing rather than a vague aspiration, changes them. Even before they've changed. The wanting itself begins the transformation. But here is where it gets complicated, and Jung never shied away from the complicated parts. When a younger person falls in love with you partly because of what you represent, the growth, the depth, the person they want to become, there is always a shadow in that love, a place where it edges from genuine connection into something more like projection, where they stop responding to who you actually are and start responding to the meaning they've placed on you, where you become less a person and more a symbol of wisdom, of freedom, of emotional safety, of the life they want, of the version of themselves they're trying to find. And here is the truth you need to hold honestly, even as you receive the warmth of being desired. Projection and love are not the same thing. They can coexist. They often do at the beginning, but they are not the same thing. Projection loves what it imagines. Love loves what is real. The question you will eventually need to ask, gently, honestly, without rushing to answer it before you're ready, is whether this person is in love with you or with the feeling that being near you creates in them. Whether they love your reality, with all of its contradictions and ordinary moments and human imperfections, or whether they love the version of you that exists in their imagination, which is always idealized, always more perfect, always the answer to everything they've been hoping for. This is not a reason to close the door. It is a reason to open it slowly. to allow reality to enter the relationship gradually and to watch what remains after the projection begins to clear. Because if what remains is still warmth, still curiosity, still a genuine desire to know you and be known by you, then something real is there, something worth attention, something worth taking seriously. But if what remains, once the idealization begins to soften, is confusion and disappointment, and the particular pain of discovering that you are a person rather than a symbol, then you have your answer about what this was, and you can receive it with compassion rather than judgment. For them and for yourself. Here is what I want you to really hear. Not just intellectually, but somewhere below that, somewhere in the part of you that has sometimes, quietly, in the privacy of your own interior life, wondered if you were still someone who could inspire that kind of feeling in another person. You are. Not despite everything you've been through, not in spite of the years and the experiences and the wounds that have shaped you, because of them. The way a river is more interesting, more beautiful, more powerful, more alive, after it has moved through difficult terrain. After it has learned to navigate around obstacles, after it has carried things that were heavy and set them down and continued. You are more, not less, than you were before. And the younger person who cannot stop thinking about you is responding, on some level they may not be able to articulate, to the accumulated weight of everything you've become. Jung believed that the most meaningful relationships in a human life are not the ones that are the most comfortable. They are the ones that ask you to grow. The ones that see something in you that you have forgotten to see in yourself. The ones that create movement in you, in them, in the space between you, toward greater honesty, greater depth, greater aliveness. If someone younger is madly in love with you, it is because your presence creates that kind of movement in them. You stir something, you awaken something, you make the air around them feel different in a way that is difficult to walk away from. And perhaps, they're also doing something for you. Perhaps they are reminding you that you are not finished, that life is not finished with you, that the part of you that is still capable of being surprised, still capable of being moved, still capable of wondering what could happen if you let something new in, that part is still very much alive. Because here is the final truth, the one Jung returned to again and again throughout his entire body of work. We do not only receive things from the people who love us. We remember things. We remember parts of ourselves that we had quietly set aside. We recover capacities we thought we had outgrown. We find, in the mirror of being genuinely desired by another human being, a reflection of something in ourselves that is worth desiring. The younger person who is madly in love with you is not just falling for who you are. They are showing you something about who you are that you may have stopped fully seeing. And that, ultimately, is what the deepest connections always do. They don't just bring two people together, they bring each person back to themselves, to the fullest, truest, most awake version of themselves. 3 reasons: emotional safety, living mystery, the mirror of becoming. But underneath all 3 of them, underneath the psychology and the theory and the careful language of the unconscious mind, there is something simpler. You are real in a world that is very, very full of performance. And real things are always worth loving.